Imagine waking before dawn in a council house somewhere in northern England in the early 1950s. The bedroom is cold. Downstairs, someone is already coaxing a coal fire back to life while the smell of smoke drifts through the house. Britain was still rebuilding after the Second World War. Although victory had come years earlier, shortages remained, and food rationing had only recently begun to disappear. Many working-class families still watched every penny and wasted almost nothing. Meals were rarely exciting. They didn't need to be. They needed to fill stomachs, stretch household budgets, and provide enough energy for another day of factory work, mining, shipbuilding, or cleaning. These were the foods that helped make that possible. Porridge. For many families, the day began with oats. The saucepan sat on the stove while the house slowly woke around it. Oatmeal, water, a little salt, and sometimes milk. The ingredients had changed very little over generations. Britain in the 1950s was becoming more prosperous, but many working-class households still watched every penny. Breakfast needed to be inexpensive and filling, and porridge accomplished both. Steam rose from the bowl and fogged the kitchen window. Outside, factory workers prepared for another day on the shop floor. In mining communities, men still headed underground before daylight, while in shipbuilding towns, workers made their way toward the yards through streets still damp from overnight rain. Most people ate quickly, a few spoonfuls of porridge, a cup of tea, and then out the door. After years of shortages, few expected breakfast to be exciting. They expected it to keep them going, and most mornings that was enough. Bread and dripping. Some habits survived long after the war. Bread and dripping was one of them. In many kitchens, the roasting tin still sat on the stove. The meat was gone, but something useful remained. Fat was carefully saved and left to cool. By the next morning, it had hardened into a pale layer that could be spread onto bread throughout the week. For families who remembered ration books and shortages, throwing food away felt almost unthinkable. A thick slice of bread with dripping often appeared after school, before an evening shift, or late at night when hunger returned. Nobody considered it a special treat, but it filled the stomach and made good use of something that otherwise might have been wasted. In households where every penny mattered, that counted for a great deal. Baked beans on toast. Some meals required almost no effort at all. A tin of beans, a few slices of toast, and perhaps a little butter if it was available. By the 1950s, baked beans had become a familiar sight in British kitchens. They were affordable, filling, and could be prepared in minutes. That mattered in households where time was often as limited as money. Mothers preparing supper after a day of work, men returning from long shifts, and teenagers coming home hungry from school all relied on meals that could be put together quickly. Baked beans on toast appeared again and again because it was dependable. After enough years, dependability became its own kind of comfort. Fish and chips. By the 1950s, fish and chips had become one of Britain's defining working-class meals. The smell drifted through entire neighborhoods. Vinegar, hot oil, and freshly fried batter. Chip shops often stood at the center of working-class communities. On Friday evenings, queues formed outside as families waited beneath the glowing windows. For many households, takeaway food remained an occasional treat, rather than a routine expense. Newspapers wrapped around portions helped keep them warm on the walk home. People carried them through rain, fog, and coal smoke, while children often reached into the package before they even reached the front door. For a short while, supper felt different from the rest of the week. Bubble and squeak. The war had taught people how to make food stretch, and the lesson remained long afterward. Bubble and squeak transformed leftovers into another meal. Potatoes, cabbage, and vegetables from previous dinners were fried together until the edges browned and crackled. The dish appeared most often after Sundays, when families enjoyed one of the week's larger meals. Monday supper frequently began with whatever remained from the day before, a habit that reflected both practicality and memories of years when food had been much harder to come by. Many households continued making bubble and squeak well into the 1950s, even as rationing ended and food became easier to obtain. Old habits are difficult to abandon, especially when they helped people through difficult times. Corned beef hash. By the time many workers arrived home, daylight was already fading. Wet boots gathered by the door, coats were hung beside the fire, and the warmth of the kitchen slowly pushed back the cold dampness carried home from the street. In countless cupboards sat a familiar tin of corned beef. Affordable, convenient, and widely available, it appeared regularly on working-class tables throughout the post-war years. Mixed with potatoes and onions in a frying pan, it became corned beef hash. With little more than those ingredients, it was substantial enough to satisfy people whose jobs demanded physical effort every day. For factory workers, dock laborers, and miners, supper was often less about enjoyment than recovery. Tomorrow's shift would arrive soon enough. Corned beef hash was not the sort of meal people reminisced about. It lasted because it was dependable, and because it did exactly what was required of it. Spam fritters? Children growing up in the 1950s encountered Spam almost everywhere, at school, in cafes, and at home. It had become one of the familiar foods of post-war Britain. Slices were dipped in batter and lowered into hot oil until the outside turned crisp, while the inside remained soft and salty. The smell often filled the kitchen long before supper reached the table. Many families had first become accustomed to Spam during the war, and the habit remained afterward. Few people would have described it as a favorite food, but it was affordable, easy to find, and dependable at a time when those qualities often mattered more than taste. Today, Spam fritters are frequently remembered with amusement. At the time, they were simply another practical meal on the family table. Bread and margarine. Not every meal involved cooking. On many evenings, time was short, money was tight, and people were simply too tired to think about preparing anything complicated. A loaf of bread sat on countless kitchen tables across Britain. Beside it stood a tub of margarine, cheaper than butter and far more common in many working-class homes. A few slices might become breakfast before work, a quick snack after school, or a light supper at the end of a long day. The meal sounds plain today, and it sounded plain then, but simple foods like this fed millions of people through years when every household budget had to be carefully managed. For families balancing rent, coal, clothing, and groceries on limited wages, every small saving mattered. Bread and margarine was rarely anyone's favorite meal. Its purpose was simply to get people through another day. Lancashire hot pot. In the industrial towns of Lancashire, some older traditions endured. Lancashire hot pot remained one of them. Potatoes formed a thick layer across the top, while onions and small amounts of meat simmered underneath. The dish cooked slowly and required little attention once it was in the oven. By evening, the smell of onions and stock filled the house. Outside, factory chimneys still dominated the skyline. Inside, supper waited. For many families, that simple certainty was one of the better parts of the day. Egg and chips. As rationing gradually disappeared, eggs became easier to obtain. For many families, egg and chips offered something simple but satisfying. The chips arrived hot from the frying pan, while the egg sat on top with its yolk running into the potatoes. The ingredients were inexpensive, but the meal felt more substantial than bread alone. It often appeared in cafes, near factories, and bus depots, where workers stopped before or after shifts. Nothing about it was complicated, and that was precisely the appeal. Rice pudding. Dessert was rarely elaborate. Rice pudding didn't need to be. Milk, rice, and a little sugar baked slowly in the oven while a golden skin formed across the top. Children often argued over that skin, while adults pretended not to care. The pudding appeared in schools, homes, and workplace canteens across the country. It wasn't exciting, but it was familiar. For a generation shaped by war and rationing, familiarity carried its own kind of comfort. Stew. When winter settled across Britain, many families returned to the same solution they had relied upon for generations: a pot of stew. Potatoes, onions, carrots, and whatever meat happened to be available. The ingredients simmered quietly while darkness gathered outside. Coal fires glowed in the grate, and rain tapped softly against the windows. Few meals stretched ingredients further. A single pot could feed an entire family and often provide leftovers for the following day as well. By the 1950s, Britain was changing. Televisions were beginning to appear in living rooms, new housing estates spread beyond old industrial centers, and consumer goods became increasingly common. Yet, in countless working-class kitchens, supper still looked remarkably simple. They are small reminders of how ordinary people endured, not through abundance or luxury, but through habit, resilience, and the quiet determination to begin again the next morning.